Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So today's webinar, just before we get going, I just want to let you know this is being recorded. So please keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off for the recording. We will also be sharing the recording with you shortly. So if you do have to drop off or if you miss anything, don't worry, you'll get the recording and you'll be able to have a look in your own time as well. Just to let you know as well, I will be hosting a Q&A towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please save them for the Q&A section or pop them in the chat as we go. Thank you. So once again, thank you for joining this informational webinar all about the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson MSc in Healthcare Leadership Programme. So Alliance Manchester Business School, in partnership with NHS England, will be delivering a one-off part-funded cohort specifically for leaders in primary care later this year. So today is an opportunity for us to share more details on the programme and to give you a chance to ask any questions that you may have as well. My name is Rosie Gill, and I'm the Head of Client Relations here at Alliance Manchester Business School. So I look after business development and account management for some of our executive education programmes. I'm joined today by my colleague Karen Shorehand. Karen, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Hello, everybody. I'm Karen Shorehand. I'm a senior lecturer here at the Alliance Manchester Business School, where we have a health-focused group looking at policy, leadership and management, celebrating 70 years this year in that arena. So welcome to you all.
Thank you, Karen. And we're also joined by Vicky Richardson from NHS England. Vicky.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Vicky Richardson. I'm the ops lead for programmes, which includes the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson programme at NHS England / NHS Leadership Academy, which is probably what we're better known as. So yeah, I look after this programme along with all the others that are for first to mid-level leaders. And for my sins, I have also completed the programme. So I do have a bit of an insight into what the programme involves. So yeah, thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Vicky. So Karen and Vicky are going to tell you all about the content of the programme, how it's delivered, what support you'll receive, and they'll also talk about entry requirements and funding criteria specifically for this cohort, and then we'll have a Q&A towards the end. So first, just a little bit about AMBS, Alliance Manchester Business School, and who we are. So we're part of the University of Manchester, and we've been delivering executive education programs for over 50 years. We have clients in over 30 countries across 6 continents. And we offer a portfolio of short business courses centered around key themes and common challenges facing today's leaders. We also offer customized programs which are co-designed with organizations to address their business-specific challenges, and award-bearing and professionally accredited programs such as the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson program. So without further ado, I'll hand over to my colleague Karen, who can tell you all about the programme in detail. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Welcome all, and thanks again for joining us today on what is clearly a very hot day. I hope you're all coping, and your colleagues, with the heat. So why this programme? I'm totally aware that when people come to make a decision about embarking on a programme of development and education that's just over 2 years in length, at a time when you're probably very busy in life, your job is probably very busy. It's a big decision, okay? So thinking about your investment into the programme and what you're going to get in return, what the experience will be like, is really important to consider. So it's great that you're here joining us to learn more as you go through this decision-making process. So some of you may know that the suite of programmes that Vicky looks after at the Leadership Academy were born out of a response to the Francis report in 2013, which very much signalled a turn in terms of a different response to leadership and management in health and social care. And since that time, the inception of the programme in 2013-14, ourselves and the University of Birmingham have been involved in delivering a number of different pathways. And the stats on this particular slide refer to the standard Anderson pathway. So that was the original pathway of Anderson, if you like. We have since delivered the programme as a version accommodating the Senior Leader Apprenticeship Award. And this particular iteration of the programme is very much focused on those in primary care. So as someone who has worked in primary care, when I worked in the health service, I know that it's often a neglected but absolutely vital part of our system and our infrastructure. So I know some of the challenges firsthand. Hopefully you'll get a sense on that slide of how many people have joined the Standard Anderson pathway, and clearly there have been many more since. And there's some kind of headline successes about being promoted, about attributing that promotion to their personal learning and growth and increase in confidence whilst on the pathway. So you might ask, okay, what is it that this is really about? I think you're joining a national community. You will create a local community on the cohort, but that's threaded together. Whilst your experience may be very individual, it's very much threaded together by a common ethos. And I would express that in the golden threads, which are these thematic threads that run throughout the programme design and content. So they are 3 in number, and quite simply expressed, they're around making sure that all leaders think about equality, diversity and inclusion in all aspects of their leadership. So they hold that in mind. Secondly, that the patient is at the centre of care. So whilst we all have to look after each other, our own well-being and the well-being of our colleagues, our services should be designed with the patients and those that love them first and foremost. So it's patient-centric care. And thirdly, around leading sustainable improvement. So nothing ever stands still, and that might be policy driven, it might be quality driven, it might be evidence driven, it might be driven by some of the estates and facilities. There are many factors clearly which lead us to make improvements in services, but that's again one of our golden threads, which is part of this common ethos that we have on all iterations of the Anderson programme. So why choose us? You heard me trail there in my introduction that we've been delivering leadership and management education for 70 years now. So we celebrate our 70th birthday in November this year. Each year we have a Teddy Chester lecture. So Professor Teddy Chester was a professor at the University of Manchester who conceptualised the need for management education, and he started training people in the health service, which is the kind of forerunner, if you will, of what is now the general management training scheme. So we've been involved as a university, as a community, a scholarly community in that space for all of that time. Since then, things have changed. The General Management Training Scheme accepts women, thankfully, which it didn't at its inception. And now we have a purpose-built executive education centre in Manchester, which is where we run the in-person workshops that form a key part of this particular programme. So you might say, okay, Karen, it's all very well hearing you kind of extol the virtues of this programme, but what do people actually say? And Vicky may well add to this as a person who has actually been through the programme. So I'll leave the quotes on screen there for you to have a look at. But what I would say is that working with people throughout this programme, I see an enormous amount of personal growth and particularly confidence really in their, what I would call their leadership identity. So by thinking about yourself as a leader and yourself more generally and how you are positioned in the world and how you move through the world can help you think about how you lead. And I'll say a little bit more about how that influences the programme content and its delivery. So as you can see on this slide, these are real headlines in terms of how the programme is composed. So there are 8 units really. 7A and 7B are a master's dissertation unit split into 2 parts. But essentially prior to that, you have 6 units, which each mirror these themes of self, team, and organisation and system. So whilst I talked there about examining yourself and thinking about how you move through the world and how you might lead your colleagues, your department, your system, clearly you do that with others. So that's why we think about teams and team working particularly, which we know is a cornerstone of how we organise health and social care. So unit 1, self, unit 2 and 5 will be thinking about team, units 3 and 4 thinking about organisations and systems more broadly, and 1 and 6, forgive me, I didn't add the 6 on, 1 and 6 are about self and leading as yourself, how you actually do that. So a little bit more detail on the next slide, just in terms of what you can anticipate. You'll see there in the kind of berry coloured boxes a number of different workshops. So these are the in-person workshops which we host at the Executive Education Centre on the Manchester campus, University campus place. So we have 6 of those, and they're all slightly different in length. So a little bit there to kind of get your head around in terms of logistics. But workshop 1 is a 4-day in-person workshop. What we know about how adults learn best is that that often happens through experience. So you'll hear us talk a lot about experiential learning, and that is really a key hallmark of how we deliver this and many of our other programmes. Why do we do that? Because we know it's how adults learn best. What that means for you as participants in this programme is that you have to attend. You can't kind of catch up on slides or content. It is literally about being in that experience. And some of it is quite immersive and sometimes difficult to explain to someone who isn't there. So that's why we impress upon you that attendance is really compulsory. It's not something that you can repeat. The units there are all delivered online. So some of this you'll be working in a solitary fashion, working through some of the content and material. It's quite interactive, so you'll be asked to make entries in a reflexive diary log, thinking and reflecting about your own situation, your own leadership style, things that you're learning about on the programme. You'll be asked to comment on things, you'll be asked to co-create things with your participants. And what you're presented with is multimedia. So there will be things to read, there will be things to watch, and there'll be things to listen to. So it's not just flat taking in lots and lots of text. It again is designed for people who want to be able to pick and choose what they can fit into a busy work life and personal life. So all the activities have an indicative time for how long they will take you to complete. So each unit, depending on its length, will have the corresponding number of activities. And I'll say a little bit in a moment about how then we assess that learning. Just one final thing about the other symbol on that slide is the ALS. So they're there as indicative rather than specifying when they'll actually occur. So we're proud to say that we have another professor, Professor Reg Revans, who conceptualised action learning. So again, it's another cornerstone of many of our programmes, and it's a key part of how we deliver this particular programme. You'll be organised into groups of 8 to meet together with your tutor to have an action learning set. We're quite relatively flexible on the start and finish times of those, recognising people have to travel for the day. But generally speaking, they're around 10 till 4:30, where you'll come together and everyone will equally participate in working through some of the practical leadership challenges that you face in your particular context. So you learn about yourself, about your problem, and indeed others. And it's one of the things that people report they found such strength from. So Teddy Chester, Reg Evans talks about comrades in adversity. So you have difficult experiences sometimes, but you are together with each other and you work through it. So that peer community will no doubt prove extremely beneficial for you too. Okay, so just a little bit more about, to summarise really the kind of delivery. So 6 workshops of varying lengths, all face-to-face on our University of Manchester campus. The virtual campus is this online space where there are resources and learning, where you submit your assignments. We hold regular tutorials, particularly around moving into a new unit to orientate you to the themes and the key activities. And then different tutors will offer slightly different things at different times. Obviously, everyone is all getting the same support, but some people might find it helpful as a group to meet to talk about a particular assignment or talk through a particular reflection activity. Action learning sets, which I just mentioned, meet every 6 to 8 weeks, and you'll be meeting in a group of 8 peers, and those dates are mutually decided. So at the start of the programme, we ask you to come together with your diaries and tutors and map out those action learning sets in advance. So there is a bit of a say about where and when you meet for those. We ask participants to host those meetings on site in their own venues, and that allows us to kind of be a bit closer to your own context. Sometimes people invite speakers, sometimes it's just a meeting of the action learning set, but we ask you to host those, is the point I'm making. Okay, how will you be assessed? Whilst this all sounds like great fun, inevitably we are running a master's programme, and clearly that means some form of academic assessment. So if we could just move forward onto that, that would be great. So for each unit, there is a written assessment asking you to write critically, as we would expect all master's students to write. There's what we call the critical element, in which you'll be asked to think about some of the key concepts, some of the theories that you're presented with, and also thinking about searching the literature. So the academic literature may be complemented by some policy literature, but really focusing on that academic literature to tell us what is it that you understand from this. So there is that need to kind of do some unit-based research and wider reading, and we also include some work-based and reflective elements. So what does that mean? That means that we will ask you to undertake some activities in your workplace. That might be with your line manager, it might be with your team, it might be in your organisation. And when undertaking that activity, we'll ask you then subsequently to reflect on what you learned. What were your findings and what did you take away from that in terms of your developing leadership practice? So the unit lengths, some are shorter, some are longer, and the written element reflects that. So the shortest one is about 2,000 words, and then the longest is moving up into 4,500 words. The healthcare leadership case study, as you can imagine, is a much more substantial piece of work. It has 2 parts. It has a proposal and then a case study, where you do some research using a case study design to examine your own leadership practice. So I'll leave that there as a headline, because obviously there's a lot more to get into when we get to that point. But clearly you're not doing this alone. So I beg your pardon, Rosie, thank you for pointing out the qualifications that you receive as a result of this endeavour that you're considering undertaking is an award from the NHS Leadership Academy and a Masters in Healthcare Leadership awarded from the University of Manchester. Thank you. Clearly, it's a big undertaking. That's what I started saying at the outset, and it's a big decision-making process. I understand that. And what we'd like to convey to you is that you're clearly not doing this alone. There is support available. So what does that look like? Let's have a look at a little bit more about that. Every Anderson participant is allocated a tutor. It's a slightly different model than you might expect on a more traditional master's in a university, and that tutor will stay with you throughout your whole programme experience. So they do get to know you really well, and they're there to provide both pastoral and academic support. and really support your leadership development as you move through the programme, so that you get this consistency of tutor support. You will meet your tutor at the workshops, at tutorials, and at your action learning sets, and they will signpost you to the broader and hugely large university resources. So we're very lucky to have a very rich library resource. I think it is one of the largest university libraries. There's a great deal of support there in terms of academic skill development, and so thinking about writing, thinking about presenting, thinking about delving into the literature and being able to distill that in a concise and precise manner. So lots of support available for you there, both in person and virtual. Work-based support, clearly you will need that support around you. So we recommend that each student identifies a mentor. So that could be your line manager or someone else senior in your organisation. And what they can do is help open doors, help make things possible, help you to contextualise some of your leadership learning within your own organisation. So thinking about who's on the board, when does the board meet? How can I go and observe what the board does? Where are the board papers? How best to access those? That kind of thing, if that's not routinely something that is part of your role. I think that work-based support is really important for that advocacy and support and sponsorship, and helping navigate some of those paths that we ask you to take in your organisation, and there to provide some practical advice and coaching support. Clearly, working with your peers is something that people highly value on this programme, and you will meet your peers both at the in-person workshops and at your action learning sets. And that's a group you will no doubt become particularly close to. They might be your immediate community, but just to say, as I said at the beginning, you are joining a national Anderson community who have a shared ethos. And by becoming a student at the University of Manchester, you're part of our scholarly community, and you can come to our events, you can get involved in research, you can come, there's lots of things going on here. We had a really exciting presentation from the Productivity Institute, which obviously is quite key at the moment in terms of health service delivery. So lots of opportunities for you to come and get involved if that's possible. And again, those are both in person and virtual. Following your graduation, you'll no doubt become part of our Manchester alumni and also the broader Anderson alumni community. How will you benefit? I hope I've said a little bit about what you can gain from this programme. Clearly, everybody's individual baseline is slightly different. Where everybody starts from is slightly different. And that will somehow dictate what you choose to gain from this programme. But here we've tried to summarise our experience of talking to participants on the programme, what people have gained. So thinking about new leadership skills, so new knowledge and new knowledge that is applied, and that will help expand and grow your thinking. It might help you to dispel some commonly held assumptions that you've then looked at and examined in a critical manner and thought, you know, I don't think that's quite right. I'm going to do that differently going forward. From that, you get a much greater self-confidence and awareness of your own impact on others, which is really key and at the heart of leadership practice. Clearly, as you saw earlier, there will be career development. Many people get promoted as a result of their increased skills and knowledge and application and broader impact, both in their service departments and organisation. One of the things that you might think, why am I doing all this academic skill development? You are developing your digital skills, which is a cornerstone of all university education these days, as well as learning or expanding your skill in thinking critically. So not accepting things at face value, questioning and taking forward a sense of curiosity about why things are the way they are. You will clearly gain some reflective practice skills, and that will all be honed with your writing and presentational skills. Talking to our employers, who Rosie knows really well and we've worked with now for a number of years, We know that people develop into much more person-centered people. That ethos comes through around ED&I and also a focus on improvements. And there's a kind of common language that comes through having that shared ethos and approach to work. People have transferable skills, but what employers say to us is that there is real world, real-time impact arising from this theory to practice, you know, knowledge to application that arises from the programme activities that we offer as part of this programme. I think I'm going to hand over to Vicky.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so I'm just going to cover the funding element, the joyful part about where does all the money come from. So I know there's been a lot of questions in the chat about am I eligible for this cohort in terms of working in my role, and so this heavily links to the funding. So the programme is part funded. NHS England are going to contribute half of the money, and then the remaining will need to come from the learner. So that's £6,896. That can come as self-funding. It can come from your organisation. It can also come from other organisations. So we have had people say, I've got this organisation that wants to sponsor me. Does it have to be my employing organisation? No, it doesn't. It can be from a sponsor organisation. That's absolutely fine. As long as you know that you've got somewhere that money is going to come from, that's absolutely fine. Unfortunately, because of the way that the funding is allocated from NHS England, this is all part of a wider piece of work around this shift from hospital to community-based care as part of the 10-year health plan. And so that's why this cohort is specifically aimed at those essentially working in primary care, or we know there's so many different parts of the system. So anybody that has a role that is directly linked to that shift from hospital to community care, the eligibility is there because the funding has been allocated in this space. So that's why this is the specific cohort. Only other thing I wanted to say around funding is, unfortunately, we aren't able to offer payment plans. The payment of the 6,896 has to be made in one go prior to starting on the cohort of the programme. Please don't put an application in unless you have the funding, because it will automatically be rejected. So it's a good thing to have that conversation up front and early. I've had a couple of questions as well around people saying, can I part fund my employer part fund? That's absolutely fine. We just can't do a payment plan of where you're paying so much per month, unfortunately. I think that was all I've got to cover on that one. Pass back to you, Karen, I think.
Thanks, Vicky. So just a little bit more clarity on entry criteria. As Vicky outlined, it's particularly dedicated to people working in primary care. I see a question in the chat about what kind of band. I think we're always reluctant to specify that, because what we recognise is that whilst the Gender for Change is a national pay structure, you would be surprised at the amount of variation that there is nationally. So what is a band 8A in one place may not necessarily correspond to a band 8A in another. So that's why we resist really specifying what bands this is applicable to. Broadly speaking, I would say that we're looking at band 7 up, but again, please don't let that kind of put you off. If you think you have the experience and you can demonstrate that either in your professional role and also outside, because I know people have lots of roles and responsibilities outside of work. We've had, for example, applications from people who work on a charity trust board, for example. So, you know, please do put your case forward, providing you meet all the other criteria. Obviously, this is a university-based programme, and the criteria that you can see on the screen there just outline our expectations as we admit people into the university. So there's a kind of sift, both from the Leadership Academy, thinking about, are these the right people? And then we just have to make sure that you're meeting the university admissions criteria too. On occasion, and for some applicants, we will offer an interview. Again, that's nothing to worry about. They tend to be quite informal, and a conversation just to delve a little bit more into what that management experience of 5 years actually means in practice. So it's an opportunity for you to tell us more than we might be able to elicit from an application form. Okay. I think that's all I need to say about that. Vicky, are you going to run us through the application process?
I will, yes. And just to add to what Karen's just said, when I did the programme before I joined the Leadership Academy, I was a band 6 and I had to go for an interview. And it was absolutely fine. It was actually really good to just chat through everything with the university and have that kind of deeper understanding of the programme, and for them to understand my role more and make sure I was the right fit. So just to, you know, as someone with experience of that, if you do think that you are in a role where you're working in the right space and you're working at the right level, don't be put off by banding. I would say always better to put an application in and have that conversation, because even if you aren't right for this programme, you might get some information on something else that's out there that's available for you. So yeah, just wanted to add that on. So in terms of the application, step 1, I guess, is check that you meet the eligibility criteria. So that is in terms of what Karen's just said around the academic side of things, but also, you know, are you in the right role? Are you working at the right level? Are you working in the right space in terms of primary care? It is all on the application when you go onto there. So it is made very clear of what you need to be able to say that you do have. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out, and there's a lot of information on the website as well. So just check through all that, have a conversation with your line manager. As Karen's already alluded to, you really do need your organisation support in partaking in this, not just from a funding perspective, and not just from a having the days off to go and do the workshop perspective, but also, you know, you will be applying your learning, and you will be wanting to stretch into different areas. So it makes a massive difference when you've got your organisation's full backing behind you. And obviously start thinking about that conversation of having, if your line manager wants to be your mentor or anybody else. Next step is obviously the funding. As mentioned, you do need to have funding confirmed before you're able to apply. I appreciate that in the NHS, it can be quite difficult to obtain funding, and you have to jump through a lot of hoops and all of that kind of thing. So I do appreciate that, but equally, you do need to have the funding to be able to apply. To actually apply, you do it through our website. There is a link contained in these slides that you'll get. You basically have to just sign up for an academy account, and then you fill in the application form. The application form mainly is pre-populated with all of your general details, just so that we know what organisation you're from, what your role is, and all of that kind of thing. And then there are 5 questions that you need to answer. And those questions are basically, do you have your organisation support? Do you have funding? And then there's some questions that are around, you know, tell us a bit more about your role. What do you do? How do you meet the criteria in terms of level of working? Tell us a bit about what you want to do on the programme, and how your work on the programme you think is going to help benefit this shift from hospital to community care. You can go on, start your application, come back off, go back on again, finish it off, all of that kind of thing. Once you've put your application in, it will be reviewed, as Karen said, by us at NHS England / the Academy first, just to check off that you've got the funding, you're in the right roles and all of that kind of thing. And then you'll get an outcome email, either with a conditional offer to say we'd like to offer you a place on the programme, and then you just need to confirm things like your line manager's name, email address, and some bits around the funding. Or you will receive an email if you're unsuccessful. We will send you an email, but we will always detail why you're unsuccessful, and you know, open a conversation around that or any other opportunities as well. My advice would be, if you're not 100% sure, I know there's lots of people asking questions in would I be eligible or not. If you're not 100% sure, but you do have a link to primary care or that community shift, put an application in and see what happens, because it's really hard when you sort of give a line snippet of what you do for me to say whether you're eligible or not. So my advice would be, if you're not sure but you think that there's the chance there, put an application in. We'll always come back to you if we read your application and think, well, we've not quite got enough information. We'll reach out to you to have that conversation as well. So yeah, don't be put off by that. And then obviously we'll pass the information over to the university, who will do those final checks around academic elements and all of that kind of thing. But I promise you, the application is not overly onerous. It's just those questions that you need to have to think about around your role and what you do and how that's going to have an impact. Applications are open now and they will close on the 27th of July for this cohort. So like I say, I appreciate it is a bit of a fine line between making sure you've got the funding approved and getting your application in, but hopefully there'll be enough time for you all to do that. But if you have any questions around the application, you're always welcome to reach out to us, and we're more than happy to help you and answer any questions. So yeah, I think that's it for the application process.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vicky. Really helpful. So we've had, lots of questions coming through, as you say, people wondering if they are eligible. So yeah, given what Vicky's mentioned there about, it being a little bit tricky with just seeing one line to know if you're eligible, do look at the application form, pop an application in, or our contact details are at the end of this slide deck here, which will get sent out to you. So there is an inbox that you can email to the NHS about this specific programme if you want to describe in more detail what your role is, and get some more tailored advice on whether you'd be eligible. But yeah, as Vicky says, it's worth putting an application in if you feel like you have a connection to primary care as described. Okay, a couple of things looking at non sort of experience, non kind of role eligibility. Can it be funded by student finance? Vicky, is that something that you can cover?
Not sure, to be honest, not that I'm aware of, because you are paying NHS England rather than specifically via the university. So unfortunately, I don't believe that is an option for this particular cohort.
That's my understanding as well. Yeah, so unfortunately not for this. So we've got Lola asking about the CMI qualification. So when we ran this program as an apprenticeship, we had a CMI qualification, but that was to do with the endpoint assessment and the apprenticeship. So that qualification is not part of this particular iteration of the program. So duration of the program, Karen, could you just maybe clarify a little bit about which part, how long for the masters and dissertation?
So the program is 26 months in length, so just over a couple of years, and that's to complete absolutely everything, including the dissertation.
Brilliant. And how much time can people expect to commit to this per week?
Yeah, so as an academic, I'm obviously going to say that you need time to do the reading. I suppose, you do have to be realistic. Okay, so I would account for anything between 7 to 14 hours a week. Now, when you say, Karen, how on earth am I going to do that? There will be variations. Some weeks you will do more, perhaps leading up to an assessment deadline. Some weeks you will do less. Okay, so what I would say, as someone who has completed the vast majority of their qualifications part-time whilst working, is best to keep it going. Just don't let it fall out of your headspace. So keep it going, keep a little bit going every day, or at least every week, because when you become distant from the program, it feels much harder to get back in, and then you have that thing in your head that all your peers are ahead of you and you feel behind. Even if you're not actually, you feel behind. So if those kind of things happen, then it's time to reach out. What I would say at this point, as you are considering applying and what that might mean for your day-to-day life, just over 2 years, it's a considerable undertaking, but in the broad perspective of your career overall, it's not that long. Inevitably, there will be things that will have to give a little bit. There are only so many hours in every day and in every week. So best to be realistic about your time. It is finite, but plan ahead. The activities online, as I say, they have an indicative time. So if you think, okay, I've got an hour here, then, I can do this activity. But for this, I'm going to need, a chunkier piece of time. I'm going to need to do some reading, some note taking in preparation for my assignments. I probably need 3 to 4 hours. And I'm going to struggle to do that in my place of work because I have an open door policy and people are going to come and interrupt me. So think about where and when you can actually fit this into your life. I can't say what that is because all of you know your own lives much better than I ever could. So it's for you to think ahead, talk with your network, your social structure. How is this going to work? What can give? What can be put aside? What can be reprioritized? And that is all part of taking on a kind of endeavour like this at this kind of mid-career point. Right, said enough, probably too much.
No, that's great. Thank you, Karen. And Vicky, would you be able to just give a bit more detail on the sort of the deadline for the payment and how the payment process works?
Yes. So for the payment process, what will happen is if you are successful, we will send you some details about how you can pay NHS England. So if your organisation is paying, it'll probably be like a raising of a PO. If you're self-funding, we'll send you an invoice. And essentially, the deadline is that you have to have provided us with your payment information before the cohort starts. So that is either your details to send the invoice to for your self-funding, your organisation's purchase order, or internal transfer if you're from NHS England. Those details, we have to have those details before the cohort starts. Then the invoices will be sent out or whatever, and then you will have however long it says on the invoice to make that payment. And if you don't make the payment, then you will be taken off the programme or whatever. But basically the deadline is for us to have that information to allow NHS England to raise that invoice. And then obviously once the invoice is raised, it will be expected to be paid within the normal terms and conditions, as it were. I hope that makes sense.
Brilliant.
But you will get full information with all of the deadlines and what you need to do from us.
Fab. And just to carry on from that and answer Heather's question there, the part funding is encompassing of the entire program. So yeah, up into the MSc. And Annie has asked about accommodation. This is not included or provided. So this is something that you would need to look at sourcing and paying for either yourself or an arrangement with your organisation. Okay, I can't see any additional questions that we've missed. Any other questions? Yes.
Oh, beg your pardon, Rosie. I think there was one about GCSEs.
Okay.
So perhaps worth mentioning that was a requirement of the apprenticeship programme and is not something that we stipulate for this particular iteration. The academic and experience criteria were displayed on the earlier slide. So no, you don't need to have your maths and English GCSE certificates from the loft, which no one wants to be going into at this time of year. It's too hot.
No, oh gosh, no. Fantastic. And yeah, so the starting date, our cohort starting towards the end of August. All of our workshop dates are on the application form. So I would recommend also just having a look at all of those dates and making sure that you are available. As Karen mentioned, those workshops are compulsory and are face-to-face. And in terms of accepting funding from charity,
yes. Yes. So in terms of the funding, to put it in the most simplistic way, is wherever the money comes from is absolutely fine as long as you have the money. So it can be from any organisation, a charity, from whatever you want. From our perspective, we aren't restrictive on that as long as we know that you've got the funding available from somewhere. So yeah, we have had a couple of people who have had charities back them, so that's not a problem.
Lovely, thank you. And just to reiterate around the comment around banding, it's something that can be a guideline, but is not set in stone. Generally, the programme is sort of aimed at people in band 7 and above. However, please don't let this put you off. We do look at things on a case-by-case basis. So if you feel like you meet the criteria, please do still apply. And once again, just to say, 'cause there may have been a few eligibility questions in terms of would I be eligible in the role that I do? Just to reiterate, because some people have been leaving and entering at different times throughout the webinar. So just to reiterate that if you do feel like you have connections to primary care in the way that's been described, then do please go ahead and put an application in, and this can be, described in more detail, which would help Vicky and her team to assess that eligibility. Okay, if there are no further questions, just to let you know once again that this has been recorded, and so we will send this to everybody in the meeting, but also anybody that registered that couldn't make it. So if you have any colleagues that you know who couldn't make it but did register, don't worry, they will be getting access to the recording as well. Just finally, contact details. So you've got mine up there and Vicky's. I can answer anything specific to the University of Manchester, Alliance Manchester Business School. If you have questions more around the funding and eligibility, then there is an inbox there that is monitored by Vicky and her team, and they can deal with any incoming inquiries that you may have. Okay, so thanks so much for joining us. I hope you're coping in the heat. And yeah, I hope that we'll hear from some of you after this. Thank you.
Best of luck.